Kumla Nablat Gemara. It's Tuesday. Today's Daf is Daf Chav Ches Amud Aleph, and we're learning to the full Shlema from my father, Rav David Nachman ben Yechebet Shifrei. You should have Yeshua Hashem Bekerev Beheref Ayin. You should have a total of full Shlema. Go to Mamish Mishnah. How may we get? If somebody brings a get, he's a shliach, and he's bringing up half somebody who's an old man, said was sitting behind in some city. Or was sick. And now by the time a few weeks later, he arrives at the destination, your question is, can we assume that the man is still alive and therefore it's a valid get? Or do we say the person might have died and ain't get? Once the person died, there's no point having a get. She's now a widow, and the ramifications that comes with it as Yivama. And interesting, Rashi says that the problem is that the person died, you're no longer a shliach. The problem is that the person died, it's not only not a shliach, there's no one to give a get to because she's already a widow. Yeah, that needs to be explained. Then the Mishnah continues. We assume the person is still alive. Number one, same principle. Bas Yisrael and Shul Kohen. If a Yiddish woman is married, a Bas Yisrael is married to a Kohen, she's entitled to eat truma. What if the husband goes away overseas on a business trip? Because she continue eating truma, assuming the husband is alive. She can eat truma. Why? We have a law. We'll learn the chulna if you're out there. There's a thing called the status quo. We always leave things the way they are, and therefore we say that that there's a chazakah that he was alive when he left. There's no reason to assume that anything changed. Case number 3, same principle. The Gemara is going to ask why we need 3 cases. Hashaleach chatos, somebody lives overseas, he wants to send a carbon chatos with a shliach to Yerushalayim. And the din is, if the owner is no longer alive, we had the Gemara a few times. There's 5 different chatois that die. You don't bring it as a carbon. One of them is if the owner is no longer alive. And if you do bring it to the base of Mikdash, she committed a sin, bringing chulin to the Azara. We have a big machlekes tanaim and psachim. In other places where the chulin ba'azara is mahatayra and avera, still you can bring the carbon, assuming the person is still alive. Makrivin oisei, you can bring in the cheska shukaim, assuming the person is still alive. Amar Rav says Rabbi. When do we say we assume the person's alive? That he didn't reach the age of 80. And why is it so special by the age of 80? Because it says in Tehillim Moshe, a person lives 70 years. It's actually, it's a striking period because Moshe Rabbeinu said this tefillah Moshe, and then when it comes to Yemeshan Aseinu Behem Shimon Shana, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't start out till he was 80 years old plus, so he looked 120, and then he said Imigvudish Shmoinim Shana. You wouldn't expect that coming from Moshe Rabbeinu. In fact, we had a case that says that maybe this part wasn't said by Moshe, but rather by David, who only lived 70 years. The chayla and a sick person, most people are sick, eventually become better. Maybe will help them that my father Mitzvah falls in that category. But once you reach 80 years old, or a goysa, somebody's in the throes of dying, the majority of people who reach that stage will pass away. Then we cannot assume the person is still alive anymore. Our Mishnah is not referring to such a case. I ask a question. It says in a braisa, maybe somebody brings a get to and he left the person, the shliach left, and the person that sent it is an old man. Afilu ben meishan, 100 years old, he's now finally divorcing his wife. Nois in law, maybe to avoid yibum because that's not the children. Nois in law becheska shurkar. He can still give it, thinking that he's alive. Here's more than 80 years old. To Yufta. So one pshat nigmar is we repudiate the Rabba's word. No difference. We always assume a person will live, no matter how old they are. Or Iba is saying, but there's a difference. Even the iflik. Once you reach a certain age, like it says after 100 kilo of a batul alamed, that once you reach a certain age, you live so long, we can assume you can live weiter and you have a chazakah. What's that age? According to Rashi, it's 90 years old. Rashi says from 80 to 90, that's the period that people will pass away. But once you're 90 years old and still alive, you can have a chazakah, the person is still alive. Others say you take it literally 100 and over, like in Pirkei Avos. Rabbi asked Rabbi a question. Now Mishnah said that maybe given you took a get your shliach on behalf of an older person or a sick person. You can assume the person is still alive. But I'll ask you a question, and it says elsewhere, we have a number of times the Shas, if a man says to his wife, he's giving her a get to protect her, she shouldn't remain an aguna. So he says to his wife, I'm traveling overseas, here is your get. It takes effect 1 hour before this person passes away. She can no longer truma miyad. When it was an hour before you pass away, maybe he'll pass away in an hour. So every minute you cannot eat truma because maybe he'll pass away an hour. If he passes away an hour, she's no longer married to a kohen because the get takes effect an hour before. Now we just learned in the Mishnah that we assume the person is alive. You can give the get, and here we're saying that straight away she can no longer eat truma because maybe the husband will die. Amalek Rabba makes a distinction, not between whether do we assume the person is already dead or the person will die, but rather the difference is between the case of truma and the case of a divorce. Our Mishnah is talking about a divorce, whether you can transfer the divorce to the wife, assuming the Meshalech, the husband is still alive, versus by a truma, she should be machmer, not eat truma. Karamis, truma, you're asking, I mean, truma, agiti karamis, truma, efshet, truma, you have an option. Don't eat truma, eat chulin. So why enter the sphere of a suffix? Or the get, a get le'efshe. If you're going to say that every time a person overseas says they get, will say maybe there's a possibility he died, then how ever is a woman going to be divorced if the husband is overseas and she's elsewhere? So then I asked back, okay, within Truma itself, you want to say Truma because you have an option, we'll never assume the person's alive. So I'm asking a question. Tonight it says clearly in our Mishnah. It says in other places, Bas Yisrael Hanashu Lekoin, if a woman is married to a Kohen, he went overseas, it says clearly that you can eat Truma. Even in the case of Truma, if the husband went overseas, you can continue to eating Truma. Right, like it says right over here. And yet, it says right here in Amish, right? You continuing truma. But yet the same price you brought. So this get will take effect 1 hour before it passes away. Asur and truma. Shiny Hassam, there's different. There is different because he asked on him 1 hour before he passed away. What do you mean? Generally speaking, to say that the person died, we assume the person like the Chazak person didn't die. Here we are focusing on while the person's still alive. Is this the hour that he's still alive before he dies? That's a different part. So we're focusing on the fact that he's alive. And if we're focusing on the fact that he's alive, this doesn't contradict the chazaka. The chazaka is that right now he's alive. So if you're going to say that maybe the person died, you cannot give the get because the person is no longer alive, you can't, that's contrary to chazaka. We're going to assume he's still alive. But in this case over here, we're not saying that the person's dead. We're saying the person's still alive, but this is an hour before this person is going to pass away. And therefore, we're going to say, in this case, you're not contradicting the chazaka, and this notation sort of adds to this explanation. And therefore, it makes sense to say that we are worried that maybe this is the hour before he passed away, and that's why she can no longer read. Masculine, Papa says, you're assuming that the person will die first, and therefore she can no longer truma. There's still something involved. Maybe she will die. He's still alive, but maybe she will die first, and therefore if she dies first, she could eat. She could eat. The Chazaka says that maybe that she, to the very last moment of her life, she'll be able to eat truma because she predeceases her husband, and therefore, this contradicts that Chazaka. So why are we saying that maybe she can no longer eat truma? Element of like kasha. Abai says no problem. We're talking about here the future, whether we say where a person will die or not. I'll say the difference is very simple. The difference between the Mishnah and the Brisa is whether we follow Rab Meir or we follow Chachamim. Are we concerned that maybe the person will die, then she can no longer eat truma? That's an hour before. And the other place that says if the husband goes overseas, she continue truma, follows the Chachamim. Now we're not worried the person is going to die. So you want like cash. Our mission is Rameh that says the person goes, she can eat truma, the lechayis, the mission, we're not worried about the person die. And Horab Yehuda, this one, an hour before he dies, as the get takes place, you can no longer eat, follows Rabbi Yehuda. And this is the case we learned a few days ago about Erev Shabbos or no pots, the Tanan Alekech Yaima, because you buy wine from a kusi and you have to give truma ma'aseh, you don't have it for Shabbos, you don't have the wherewithal to, or you don't have the pots to make anything. What do? So you're going to talk about the Matzah Shabbos, so when I have the pots, I'm going to separate, and that's good enough. And the second explanation we gave there is that not that they're arguing a braid, but they're arguing whether we're concerned that the pot will break. Is that Meir says Shnei Lugishos have the two looking I will separate how they end truma with truma asara, Ma'aser Edition, Tendel, Ma'aser Edition, Tisha, Ma'aser Sheni, Umeichel the Shoisim Miyad. So what he does is that he is the Ma'aser Sheni, he speaks out the way Rashi learned, and he separates it on something in the house, and he said the kedusha gets transferred to the money, and he could bring straight away. We're not worried that he'll break Motzei Shabbos or when he gets pots. Clear. Same argument. Are we worried that other bad things going to happen in the future or not? And that's the argument. But you can eat truma because we hold like Rabbi. Rava says, I'll tell you the difference. The difference between past tense and future tense. Shema meis leichashinin. Every minute that she wants to eat truma, you're going to say that maybe the guy's already dead? No, there's a chazakah that says the person's alive. Or b'shema yamas, an hour before he dies, he can only eat truma. We're talking about maybe he'll die. There's no chazakah that contradicts that. Everybody eventually passes away. So chashin, and then we are worried. The case that we're talking about, the Angel Meir Chacham, was talking about this canteen and this barrel that holds the wine, this leather barrel. The Kishemi Yamasu didn't break it. We're saying it might die, and yet Upligi, we have an argument. You're saying that if it's going to happen, everyone agrees things break. No, so it might happen. How could I make it? They're arguing. I'm going to read this shiny noid. No, you know what I may have said. We're not worried about it. You're right. Everything eventually breaks. But over here, you can give somebody to supervise and make sure it doesn't. So therefore, the mayor says we're not worried. Shiny noid. The muscle. Always in the future we're worried, but a noid is different because you can observe it, you can monitor it. So you want to mask it on Misharshe, but the monitor itself needs a monitor because maybe you'll fall asleep. There's no guarantee. So if we worry that something eventually will break, so then how could a mayor say we can rely on it? Elamarama. Shema maze to say that it already happened. Everybody agrees we're not worried that you can eat truma right now to say husband already died. No, the chazak he's alive. Shema yamus, and maybe the husband will eventually pass away, and this is an hour before. Then that's a machlekes to know. The mayor is not worried. Then the Mishnah said, case number 2, case number 3. If you send your carbon chatzim from overseas, we can bring the base of Migdash, but being a smicha, but we need smicha. Rabbi Yosef says, the carbon nashim. Rabbi Yosef says, we're talking about a carbon of women that doesn't require smicha. Every carbon requires, not every carbon, sorry. There are a number of carbonas that require smicha, then you have to put your full force, most of your body on it. And but we also learned that B'nai Yisrael are saying B'nai Yisrael. The women don't have to do the smicha. We actually had this Mishnah Chagiga. The women don't have to do the smicha, and therefore we're talking about the carbon of women. There's no smicha involved, and therefore a person can send it from overseas. And the Papa says the chata sa'if. The Papa says they're talking about a carbon which is a bird, and there's no smicha on a bird. So Tez already asked, but smicha is not something that if you don't have smicha, the carbon is possible. But Tez we should do it in a way that you could do smicha. So Tez asks a very interesting question. So how do we have a concept that an oral, somebody who's not circumcised, can send his karbonas to the base of Migdash, or a tameh can send the karbonas, but there's no smicha, and we know that smicha can only be done by the person itself. It cannot be done through a shliach. We dash from a pasuk that only you can do smicha, and not a shliach. So how can you send karbonas to your tameh or an oral? So Tate says the following: when you have a choice, then you have to do smicha. If you have an oral is where all his brothers died, hemophiliacs, they couldn't get bris, so you couldn't have one either. You have no choice. A tummy is talking about, for example, there's a case about the acha. There's a time delay, you can't wait. You must bring the carbon. You have no choice, bring it without smicha. But over here, Taisus was very interesting, says you have a choice. Just because you live overseas, there's no excuse why you cannot go to the base of Migdash. You go to the base of Migdash and you bring that carbon. That is called a choice. And therefore, we should not allow you to bring without smicha. So Taisus fascinatingly learns that if you live overseas, it's not an excuse to say, well, I can't do it, I'll just send it and someone else can do the mitzvah on my behalf. If you have to do a mitzvah in a certain way, and we need the owner there, if that's preferable, then that's called a choice. And you make the effort to make your trip to the trek to Yerushalayim. Fascinating. So the Gemara asks, why do you need 3 cases? All the same principle. Utzrich, we need all cases. The Ashmini get, you tell us by a get that we say that you can deliver the get, assuming the person's still alive. What choice do you have? If you're not going to, if we can assume the person's not alive, how is a person ever going to send the get from one place to another place? You always have an option. Eat chulin, so why should we rely on this chazakah? If we're thinking on relying. The Ashmina Truma thing by Truma, the Zimn and the Loy Efshe. If we're Truma, because we'll say maybe the Loy Efshe, it's not possible. Maybe it's not possible. Avol Chat, yeah, but what do you mean it's not possible? Because let's say she's poor, she cannot afford to buy no. Avol Chat Sa'oif, when it comes to Chat Sa'oif, and therefore it's Misfeka, Loy Leil Chaim Azor, there's another problem there. Because since it's a suffix, maybe it's not really a carbon, and you're going to bring it to the base of Migdash, you bring the Chulin to the Azora. Maybe in this case, there's another factor that we should take into consideration, and we should not bring it, not say, oh, maybe the person's alive. Because if the person's not alive, you're doing actually something wrong. Therefore, we need all of that. Taisha already asks, but we know that Chatzah Sa'if is unique, that you can bring it even when there's a suffix. All of the Chatzah is, if there's a suffix, you don't bring it by an animal. But by a bird, you do bring it, so therefore bring it. Says Taisha, that's only the owner himself, not the shlich. He has no right to bring it. The agent has no right to bring it. Says the Mishnah further, talking about possibility, do we assume the person's still alive or not? The three things Rabbi Lazar said, if they for the chamim, the kain was the word, they all agreed with him. Number one, there's a city that was surrounded by an army, or a ship that's threatening to be capsized. Someone is being taken to court, being judged, tried on a capital case, and the punishment is execution. As long as we don't know otherwise, we'll still assume that they're alive, and you can give the get. Or in other cases, where they once were captured by an army, or a ship that lost its way in the sea, and it looks like it's not just that it's the storms, terrible storms and terrible waves, but rather it's impossible for the ship to survive. He didn't see them actually drown, but it's impossible. Or the hayotze leharig, they already passed the verdict, and now they're taken in for execution. In those cases, you cannot say 100% they're dead. So you have your machmer, maybe they're still alive, and maybe they are still dead. But in the case of the army, surrounding the capture of the city, you don't know for sure that everyone's dead. And same with the boat, we're not talking about they actually saw it capsize. And what do you mean he did both chumras? Bas Yisrael the Kohen, or Bas Kohen Yisrael let's with Truma. So Bas Yisrael to the Kohen, maybe he's dead. Cannot be Truma. Bas Kohen Yisrael, maybe he's still alive. Cannot be Truma. When do we say that if you're being taken to be executed, we'll assume there's still a possibility you're alive? It's only better than Yisrael, because till the very last moment, somebody can come along and say, "Oh, I have merit. I can find a way out to pardon him." Then we have to listen. But so therefore, it's never final till it happens. By a bezin of going, once they decided to execute the person, we will kill him. Bezdin shalov the just like by Yiddish court, maybe they'll find us chus by Bezdin. If you bribe somebody, they also let the person give them a reprieve, a last minute reprieve. The basis no. Kishokle, when will they take bribes? Mekamed the lachten before they seal pursation among which no amok, before they seal the actual verdict sign, or Taisa brings here that before the head die-in signs his name to it. But the boss of the mechte pursation amok. Once they've signed, that's it. By Goyish court, it's over. Can't change it. Can't reverse it. Makes last a question. It says, what happens? Somebody was tried in the court, and then he left for whatever reason it wasn't carried out, or you fled. If two people enter another court, we know that he was already sentenced that court, tried, and he was found guilty. Any of those people were the witnesses, and then the Bezdin captured this person. Nowadays, how did they kill him? How do they know why? Maybe the Bezdin found his chus and pardon him. Because he fled, that tells us that he knew that there was no way they can pardon him. So there's no reason to suspect that they pardoned him. No proof. So Yiddish court, Yiddish court will say there's a possibility they could be pardoned, but a Goyish court, once the execution came out, that's it. It's final. So our mission is talking about Yiddish court. And we say Chumre Chaim, maybe still alive. They heard from a Bezin saw that this person died in the court. What do you mean died in the court? Because we don't have a prison system, but if somebody repeated that later 3 times, he got lashes and still did it again, we put him in prison, and eventually he dies. We slowly diminish the amount of food that he gets, reduce the amount of food till eventually he dies. So what happens? The Bezin said this person died under our supervision, or Nerig, he was killed by us. Yasiyas Ishta, he can go ahead and marry. She's definitely she's a free woman. But when it comes to this, the executions by Goyim, each playing mess, each playing this person died, and this person was killed. You cannot automatically assume the person is dead. My mess of my life. What are we talking about? They say that he mamish died. Over Nerig, my mamish died. And by Yiddish record, we believe the Kavah and by God we don't believe. And my why shouldn't you believe Makayim? The rule is the Kol Masiach Levitume. Anytime a guy says ages, which he doesn't realize we're actually listening to his testimony. Stop, he's talking, hey, Munim Henry, we believe him. So why don't we believe here that the person died? Elav mace means Yotzei Lamus. Mace means that they're taking him to be killed, to die, or Nehara Yotzei about to be killed. And Uktani, by Bezdin Yisrael, by Yiddish court, you see, we will take that as a fact that he married, and we're not assuming that she can get married. We're not assuming that they found the chus to free her. As his wife, says he want to know. La'ela meis mamish. Talking about he mamish died. The Nerim was killed. So why should be a difference in Yiddish court? Yiddish court we believe. So why not a Goyish court? The comment you ask, the kavasi by a goy, why not? But Kaimalon, the Chomas, if they tell us his way, they're supposed to add living, we trust them. Hani mili b'milsa l'shaych. The only thing that doesn't really relate to them. Abel milsa l'shaych also relates to them. Of the lachzuki shekraya, sometimes they maintain their lies, even though it didn't happen yet, because they want to make sure that everybody thinks that they carried out what they're supposed to carry out. So according to this version of Yisha, we always say that maybe they changed some schus came about, so we cannot formally say that the person is dead until he actually the Bezin says he was killed. But in the Goyish court, once it was taken to be executed, we assume is executed. However, there's another version of it that exactly the opposite. I'm going to be saying, I'm going to be saying, we say that if they said to be executed, he's executed. Al Bezin Yisro by Yiddish court, keeping the nafil like din l'tolo kotle. If the Bezin says he be killed, we can assume he be killed. Bezin Yisro nami efshel chazin schus. Just like the Goyish court can take bribes, can the Yiddish court also see as schus? Says the Gemara, ki chazi schus mekabel, but usually the schus comes up before they reach a final verdict. Basig madin asul chazas schus. Once madin, the chances of them finding a schus is so rare, it's as if non-existent. Leima misayela, we can prove this. So all the cases that we brought questions, now we're using as proofs. Two people come along, this person was found guilty in another court. Adam and these two people, whereas Adam had a Yehudi, we kill him. So we see that in the court. You're right. Once there's a verdict, we never change our mind. So it's not a raya, because he fled. That's a raya that didn't change their mind. But in an ordinary case, doesn't prove Rabbi Yosef, because could be the Bezin will change their mind if they found this chus. Okay, Toshma coming here. Shama Bezin Shei also heard from a Bezin Shei. I mean, each plane that this person died, this person was killed, the person can get married. So Yiddish court, that's still not a guarantee the person is dead. Sorry, that is a guarantee the person is dead. But if from the document from the execution by going, each plane makes each plane edic, you see, don't marry his wife. My mace and my edic. What happened? Even makes Mammy say he was killed, he died, and then Mammy killed. And what then by how come the kavos what's the guy? If you believe, why not a guy? Why should believe? Why should she remarry her? Always believe. I'm talking about mace, yoitze lamus. Mace means is taking out to be killed, Veneta to die, and Veneta Yitzhak again to kill. Utani, Bezin Yisrael, you see in the Jewish court, we she get married because obviously Bezin is never going to change this. Because actually, Rabbi Yosef said, and his and his wife, Rabbi Yosef, then the Jewish court, once they pass the verdict, it'll never change. Says Gemara, no. Leila Mace Mamad and Mamad talking about where the Bezin says he died, he was killed. The Kavas and Gabriel saying by going. And therefore, nothing to do with Rabbi Yosef's case. No proof to Rabbi Yosef either way. So my law, he said, why by a Goyish court we don't believe? Yeah. The Hokaim and the Chomasiv Tumba, him would manage to believe. Hani the business Shaykhway, which this doesn't relate back to them. But Milsa the Shaykhway relates back to them. Of the Larzuki Shekraya, sometimes they maintain their lies, so people should think that they carried that they did their duties, and who said they ever did it. Okay, we'll stop here between tomorrow and Mitzvah.